everything's fairly smooth. And then I'm just gonna tap it on the table till I have a nice round shape. Not an oval, just a round shape. Okay, so this is a good size cylinder. It's a good size roller. And I'm gonna take my bit of basket here, I'm gonna flatten it out, and I'm just gonna try my best to roll this pattern across. Now, notice I didn't get too much of that pattern happening, so what do I need to do? What do I need to do to fix that? I'm going to start fresh. Chances are this is not like weighty enough for me to steal something from. So I'm going to go steal my pattern from something else. The wheels here in the studio on the foot pedals, they have a particularly interesting diamond texture. It's much stiffer than this basket. So when you think about making textures or stealing textures, think about something that won't compress or will fight you back essentially. So give me 1 second and I'll be right back. All right, so I've come back and I've got my roller with some interesting texture. I took this from the foot pedals. It's a little better, the impression is better, and it's a very consistent sort of diamond-shaped texture, which I think will produce interesting results when I biscuit, like this one. All right, cool. So you're gonna need 3 of these. 2 of them will be carved. 1 of them will be a stolen texture. When you think about carving your stamp, think about what patterns could be interesting. Maybe they're swirls, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're hearts, maybe they're diamonds, maybe they're suns. Get creative. Think about what patterns could be interesting to make your clay pieces out of. And they don't even have to be carved in. You could sculpt on top, or you could carve out. So you could make a relief stamp instead of an inset stamp. Cool. I'm going to clean off my space here. We're going to move on to the next bit, which is going to be sort of a combo of the two. We're going to sort of talk about tiles. So for your tile exercise, you will need 6 tiles today. 4 of them we will work with. 2 of them you are just going to leave blank and, set them aside for later. But in order to take this and get something that's much similar to this, see how thin that is? We are going to need to roll this out significantly thinner. So how do you do that? How do we do that, and how do we make it consistent? So first things first, we need to sort of get a general shape to start with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my ball of clay and pat it down to where it's a little bit thin, like it's a little bit more pancake-like, right? I'm going to keep going until I've got a little more room to where it's got a little width. So this is called throwing a slab. And in order to do this properly, you're not going to, the common mistake is that you just throw it down on the table like this. It makes a loud sound, but it doesn't really produce any results. So what you really need to do is pull it in a direction. You can do that by pulling it towards your stomach or to the side. And if you just do this and slowly rotate out your slab, you can get it to stretch without much effort. So we're going to keep doing that. And when you get to a point where it feels okay, you can switch over to something that may be a little more simpler. A rolling pin. We have a bunch of big ones of these in-house, and I recommend the big ones because until you get sort of like build up some muscle, having that extra weight of the larger rolling pin can be very helpful, because this sort of rolling pin, you know, it requires a little bit of weight behind it because it's just a cylinder and it's very light. So just like with your baked goods, your rolling pin can create a more significantly, it's a larger piece. The one problem and the one downside with this is you have to maintain consistent pressure. Otherwise, you're going to get a slightly inconsistent slab. The thickness will change. So if your pressure is light here but really heavy here, it's going to be really thin here and really thick here. And we don't want that. We want sort of consistent pressure. So how do we make sure that happens every time? Give me 1 second. So here in the studio, we have these things, and these are called shims. They're just thin pieces of wood that are about the same thickness. And these are 1/8 of an inch. 1/4 of an inch is also a good diameter. And the way we use a shim is we essentially just place it side by side, adjacently to our slab. I want my slab to get a little longer this way, so I'm going to turn it that way. And we're going to use this as a guideline for our rolling pin. So that way we're not exhibiting more pressure on one side than we are on the other. And if we are, the shim's going to stop it from getting any thinner on that side. The shim is going to allow us to consistently roll out the same thickness throughout. So that way, it keeps it level. It's not going to get any thinner than this because the rolling pin won't let it. Awesome. So now we have a slab. But is that enough? No. Before we do anything, before we even touch the next thing, we are going to compress. Compression is very, very important. It's what keeps our clay from warping. It's also what cleans up the area. Now, you can't see it quite so bad on this because it's pretty clean, but when we turn it over, you'll see it much better. So when we roll things out on this canvas, the canvas, well, maybe not to the naked eye, has a sort of hatched texture, and it's going to make your clay look like it has pores. And maybe that's not the look you're going for, and it's really not attractive unless it needs to be there. So it's very important to sort of smooth that out. In the same motion, we want to make sure we have all our particles laying flat, and that's what this is. So we are compressing our clay slab. This is going to give us an even surface and something, just a nice pleasant texture to work with. And when you do this, you need to do this in all directions. So not just this way. You need to go this way. You need to go left to right, right to left, up and down, diagonal, just until it looks like you've hit all the angles. And when it's all done, we should have a really nice, smooth slab. But if we turn it over, it's going to lose that smoothness. So what do we do to sort of prevent that? Well, a piece of paper is a really good way to keep your slab looking nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to smooth my paper over and just slide my rib under here so I can get a good hold. And I'm just going to flip it over. Now, you can see it a little better on this side. I don't know exactly how well it shows up on screen, but this slide, first of all, it's got cracks in it, but we can fix that. But also, you can see the canvas, and we don't want that. That's not what I'm trying to do. So just like the other side, I'm going to use the rounded edge of my rib, and think about like petting a cat. You don't want to dig in too deep. You just want to sort of graze the top, right? We're going to go the other way. We're going to go back this direction. And now, okay. So I'm noticing as we are, and you'll notice this as you keep working, I'm noticing as we sort of get in here, there are a few air bubbles in my slab. Well, that's not exactly detrimental sometimes. It can be a bother if you're looking for like a nice smooth texture, because it'll fire exactly like that, like you'll see the air bubble. So the best way to get rid of the air bubble is just to take your needle tool and just cross a big X through it and just hit all of them, right? Just like that. Keep going until you've got all the air out of it. And then just sort of take your finger and smudge it back together. Now you will have to compress your slab, but it should remove the air bubbles. Not always, sometimes you miss exactly where the air pocket is, but you can always go back and re-swipe it and get it. Now, air pockets aren't exactly the devil and they're not going to ruin your piece always. But say, for instance, you've got a very thick piece and it's not quite dry and somehow it ended up in the kiln. That moisture, when it tries to escape, will go to the path of least resistance. So they're going to find the most easily accessible pocket of air. And if they've got an air bubble in your clay, that's where it's going. Instead of outside of the clay body, it's going to go to the weakest point, which will be anywhere with an air pocket. All right, cool. So we have a slab. Now, before we cut into this one, we need to just figure out how large our tiles need to be. Our tiles, according to the syllabus, need to be at least 3 inches by 3 inches. Now, that's just a minimum, and I say that's the size because, well, that's a good size for getting a good idea of what we're looking for. However, I've got a bunch of cookie cutters here, and I will leave them on the beige card if you come in over the weekend, that you can use to cut out your slabs. These are a good size. They're fairly large, and they're going to allow you to have enough room to get the point across. Now, we're going to do 2 things so you can have a good idea of why I would like you to wait till leather hard. So this slab I rolled earlier, it's leather hard. This one is fresh and it's still pretty floppy. So when we talk about leather hard, the things we are looking for are sturdiness. This slab is sturdy. It will generally retain its shape. Notice I can bend it, I can hold it like this, I can set it on the table, and it's not buckling. So the one thing about this is I can bend it still and I can shape it, but if I were to fold it all the way in on itself, it would crack. But there are benefits to that. So that means it's pretty together. It's not like worried about shearing or cutting too close. This slab is super wet. So if I were to try to do what I just did with this slab, it would crumple to pieces. The same with this cookie cutter. So I'm going to cut a circle here out of my wet slab, and I'm just going to turn it because it's just a circle. And it came out fairly nicely, but notice I've still got some like sort of yucky edges that I'm going to have to clean up. So I'm going to set that aside because we're going to use that here in a bit. But if I were to do the same thing with my leather hard slab, it's set up a little bit more. So what I can do is I can take that out, and the edges are going to be a lot cleaner, and it's going to be a lot easier for me to cut without all that excess. And I can go ahead and do whatever I want to do with this slab. Whereas with this one, it's a little floppy. Like look at this. Still pretty stiff. Look at this. This has got more wiggle. So this one, it's going to fight me on some things. This one, it's ready to go. All right, cool. So I'm going to cut out a couple of these. For your tile project, you will need 2 tiles that are just blank. So what that's going to look like a finished product, You're going to need a tile, and you need to make sure your tile has a nail hole. That's just like this. Easy. You just need to do 2 of these, keep them, set them aside. I'm going to go ahead and punch those out.